Konnichiwa minasan, I'm Mateo and this is Manga You May Have Missed. Contrary to popular opinions held in the West, manga and anime are not meant purely for children and young teens. Manga that are aimed at older audiences belong to the genres of seinen for men and josei for women. I'm explaining this because today's manga is a seinen manga called Mushishi. Mushishi was written by Yuki Urushibara and published in Kodansha's Afternoon magazine from 1999 to 2008. The series is complete with 50 chapters released in 10 volumes. The English release is published by Del Rey Manga, an imprint of Del Rey Books. Mushishi was adapted into an anime series in 2005 and was made into a live-action feature film released in 2007. The anime was licensed in North America by Funimation, in Australia and New Zealand by Madman Entertainment, and in the UK by Revelation Films. Mushishi is written in an episodic fashion. The chapters do not progress along a narrative story arc, but rather chronicle events in the career of the main character. There is actually very little indication that the chapters are even in chronological order. However, the first chapter does function as a starting point, explaining the concepts that the world of Mushishi is based upon. Right off the bat, we're told of creatures called Mushi, beings that are considered otherworldly and are lowly and grotesque, different from mundane animals or plants. The title page gives us the chapter's name, the green seat, and an image of our protagonist. The chapter proper begins with an image of misty mountains. A girl high in a tree knows that someone is coming and runs off as that someone approaches. The person, a man with silver-white hair, notices her departure but assumes it is a monkey. He states that the vividness of the surrounding greenery is eerie. He reflects that in nature, green and water are qualities that define life, and that humans with these qualities are rare. This is interspersed with pictures of strange creatures and a boy writing. The boy says that he can write fine with his left hand. He writes a line of text, but the kanji start to fly off the page as he writes them. Judging by his lack of a reaction, this is a common occurrence. He states that it's happening because the characters were originally pictographs. He scribbles ink over two still on the page and chases after the airborne one as the man from earlier approaches the house. The man notices the flying letter and grabs at it. He catches it and is surprised to find ink on his hand. The boy runs up and asks if the man saw it. The man says he did and asks if the boy is Iorori Shinra and if he read the man's letter. The boy recognizes the man as a Mushishi named Ginko. A Mushishi is a person who studies Mushi. In English, we probably call him a Mushiologist. Shinra says he sent a letter in return saying he refuses. He tells Ginko that he has received requests from many Mushishi to investigate, but he refused them all according to the wishes of his late grandmother, who didn't want word of Shinra's condition to spread. Whenever Shinra draws something, anything, with his left hand, the drawing comes to life. His grandmother forbade him from drawing with his left hand, saying that the creation of new life would call down the wrath of the gods. If Shinra draws with his right hand, nothing happens. However, Shinra recently injured his right hand, forcing him to use his left. Shinra says that he's surprised the letters would start moving, but it wouldn't have been the strangest thing he's ever animated. Ginko asks what else has been given life. Shinra mentions an umbrella and a backstrasher before realizing that Ginko is fishing for information. He agrees to let Ginko stay the night due to the tough mountain roads. He also wants to hear about what's going on in the world because he's been in total seclusion. He pours Ginko some homemade sake and says he's lived alone since his grandmother's death 4 years previously. She told him not to leave the house. Ginko reflects that this was a good choice. If Shinra lived in a village, he'd probably bring something to life accidentally. He thinks that something like Shinra's case is better off left unknown, because it would scare people. Shinra gives Ginko some samples of his drawings. He says that they're drawings of things that he saw when he was by himself. He'd sketched them, with his right hand, and showed them to his grandmother. His grandmother always told him to forget what he'd seen, because they're probably visions given by his horrible power. Her disbelief in them would cause them to disappear, and Shinra never understood what was so horrible about them. It was the only thing the two never agreed on. Ginko identifies the drawings as creatures called Mushi. He explains that Mushi are a different order of life from other beings, such as insects and reptiles. He describes life using his hand and arm. The 4 fingers represent animals, and the thumb represents plants. Humans would be on the tip of the middle finger, farthest from the heart. Lower creatures are on the inside of the hand. The wrist, where the veins meet, contains bacteria and microbes. From that point, it's hard to tell what will eventually become animals or plants. However, Ginko says, there are more types of life further down than that. The creatures that are all the way down where the heart is, past the arm and shoulder, are what he calls Mushi, or Midorimono. They are the closest thing to the essence of life itself. Because of that, not only their shape, but their very existence is vague. Some people can see them, and some can't. Shinra says that the Mushi he's seen are like ghosts, transparent with the ability to walk through walls. Ginko tells him that sometimes Mushi are mistaken for ghosts, and that there are some Mushi that can take the form of humans. Ginko says it's likely Shinra's grandmother couldn't see Mushi. He says there's a special ability called Yoshitsu needed to see Mushi. It's very hard to see them when only relying on the normal 5 senses. Everyone has the Yoshitsu sense, but it's not very useful, so it's dormant in most people. It's hard for people who can use the feeling to relate their experiences to those who can't, hence Shinra's communication problems with his grandmother. Ginko says sharing between our world and the unseen one can be difficult. Later that night, Ginko starts wandering the house. He notes that Shinra has an indoor bathroom, which was extremely rare in the time Mushishi is set in. He notices something crossing the hall and pulls a needle out of his pocket, remarking that he knew there was a Mushi in the house. He walks down the hall with a lantern, wondering where it went. A voice from behind him notes the needle, which it calls a Mushi pen. It's the girl from earlier hanging on the ceiling. She asks Ginkgo if he's going to use the pen to skewer a Mushi and display it. She calls him a mean Mushishi. Ginkgo responds that it's interesting to hear a Mushi say that. The smoke from a cigarette rises up and coils around the girl Mushi. Ginkgo tells her that it's another Mushi, one that wraps around other Mushi and doesn't let go, but it quickly disappears. The smoke Mushi lowers the girl Mushi to the floor. Ginkgo picks up a broken wine cup that falls out of her kimono. He asks her if she uses it to drink sake while watching the moon. She yells at him to give it back and tells him to get out of her house. Ginkgo is initially puzzled by this statement, but then realizes that the girl Mushi used to be human. She's relatively weak because she's not a complete Mushi. He tells her that the broken cup tells him not only how the girl Mushi became a Mushi, but who she is. He says her name is Renzu. He knows this from studying Shinra's family history. He asks her if she wants to know his plan for fixing the wine cup, and calls her grandmother Renzu. Why? Because Renzu is Shinra's deceased grandmother. The next morning, Ginkgo explains the situation to Shinra. His grandmother is still in the house and has become something between human and Mushi. Shinra asks him for more information. Ginkgo tells Shinra of a phenomenon called a Mushi banquet, in which Mushi impersonate people and invite actual people to a party. At the party, the people are given wine cups, which contain a sake-like drink. When the people drink it, they lose their human forms and become Mushi. This is what happened to Renzu. However, as Ginkgo explains, the ceremony was interrupted, so Renzu did not completely become a Mushi, but she's not entirely human either. She straddles both worlds. Both parts of her care for and have been watching over Shinra from birth without him noticing. Because she's not a complete Mushi, Shinra can't see her. Ginkgo tells him that they can make her a complete Mushi with Shinra's power, although it's an irreversible change. Ginkgo says that Renzu accepted almost immediately because she wanted to see Shinra. He asks Shinra what he wants to do. Later, the two have moved outside, Shinra consenting to the task. He asks Ginkgo not to look at what he's drawing, so Ginkgo sits behind a screen. Ginkgo tells him to draw the wine cup from the banquet, the broken cup that Renzu carries with her. Shinra asks him for a description, but Ginkgo tells him to use his imagination. He says that the other half of the cup would be carried by Renzu's descendants. Ginkgo peeks at the drawing process anyway and watches color seep out of the brush without any ink. Shinra talks, half to himself, saying the cup should be a deep, vivid green, flat, and circular. Excitedly, Ginkgo tells him that he's exactly right. The drawn cup becomes a real one. It breaks in half after a second. One of the halves disappears into the nether. Ginkgo calls Renzu down from where she's been watching. Although Shinra can't see her, he can see the cup that she throws down to Ginkgo. Ginkgo puts both halves of the cup together. The cup fills itself with some strange liquid. Ginkgo tells Renzu to drink it. She slowly becomes visible to Shinra as she does so. Renzu becomes completely visible, and Ginkgo berates Shinra for staring. He tells Shinra to drink some as well for celebration. As he drinks, he sees his grandmother's memories. Young Renzu is walking in a forest, hurrying to arrive at her destination before sunset. She stops, seeing some Mushi in her path, and is caught up in a previously non-existent line of cloaked figures. She realizes that she can't leave the line. The line stops in a clearing and forms into a circle. The wine cup that Mushi Renzu carries is passed around the circle. A disembodied voice tells Renzu to drink from it. The banquet is for her. She starts to sip the drink and finds herself losing consciousness. The voice asks her if she likes it. The voice describes a being it calls Koki. Koki, more often described as a liquid, is rather important to Mushishi. The voice describes Koki as a dweller in darkness, creating patches of light which can be extracted. The portion in Renzu's cup was made specifically for her. Koki is described as being as old as life itself. In fact, Koki is essential to life as we know it. It is the water of life. Renzu was given the Koki an explanation because the Mushi want to ask her a favor. They tell her that her grandson will have a unique quality to change the living world, that's Shinra and his living drawings. The Mushi ask Renzu to watch over him because his advent into the world will be fortuitous. The Mushi say they will give her power in exchange for the carrying out of their desire and tell her to drink the rest of the sake. Renzu starts to drink but is interrupted by a crow that tears off the hand of one of the Mushi, revealing it to be made of many smaller Mushi. The other Mushi disappear and Renzu is left sitting alone, the Koki unfinished. She looks at the cup, which is now empty. She puts the cup in her kimono and heads back. Through the memory, Shinra watches another Renzu take shape behind the first one and look at the first one. This is the Mushi Renzu. Tears start to pour down her face as she watches the human Renzu walk away. Back in the real world, Shinra starts to cry in sympathy. Ginkgo reflects that Shinra's tears are due to the wine cup being broken. He's not sure if Renzu's feelings are overwhelming Shinra, or if it was Shinra's own feelings. Whatever the cause, the cup once again fills with Koki, heedless of anything else. The Koki overfills and spills onto the ground. The next morning, Ginkgo prepares to leave before Shinra awakens, but is stopped by Renzu, now a full Mushi. They know that there's been an explosion of moss where the Koki spilled the previous night. Renzu asks if Ginkgo is giving up his investigation of Shinra's ability. He is. He tells Renzu to keep her vigil over Shinra. She reasons that if Ginkgo is not investigating Shinra, there's no reason for him to stay. She worries that Shinra will be lonely by himself. Ginkgo tells her not to worry. Shinra has her to stay by his side. Shinra wakes up and Renzo tells him that Ginkgo has left. Shinra laments not having a chance to thank him. He then notices something. The wine cup is gone. Ginkgo has taken it in exchange for his services. Ginkgo walks through the mountains, continuing his travels. We're told that after this, there were no more rumors of a boy with the left hand of God. The end. The Mushishi anime is only 26 episodes long, therefore it doesn't cover all of the manga. However, due to the already episodic nature of Mushishi, this doesn't really detract from the story. It is directed by Hiroshi Nagahama and produced by Artland. The anime is, in a word, pretty. The backgrounds are beautiful, and the depictions of Mushi are strange but not horrifying. The first episode is almost a panel-for-shot adaptation of the first chapter. I'd recommend watching it. It's a very subdued, relaxing experience. The English dub is really well done. There are a couple of dialogue changes, but nothing that detracts from the narrative. Some even add to it. The dub is available to watch on Funimation's YouTube channel. A word of caution to prospective readers. Mushishi is not a lighthearted manga. Some of its stories could be considered depressing, and there isn't always a happy ending. However, most seinen manga tend to be slightly dark due to the age of their intended audiences. The stories of Mushishi are still well worth the read.
I walked 10,000 miles to see you, and every gasp of breath I grabbed it just to find you. I climbed up every hill to get to you. I wandered ancient lands to hold just you.
Do you think we should add a stinger at the end? Nah, who watches stingers?